Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras, and I'm here today with a couple of members of the Quilters Newsletter staff who we don't drag on camera very often, but we're really happy to have them here today. We have here Kath Wright, who is our senior designer, and Susan Geddes, our art director. And we're here today to talk about this quilt that's hanging on the design wall. It's on the cover of our August-September 2014 issue, which is our 45th anniversary issue, our first issue having come out September 1969. This quilt has a wonderful story behind it, and we want to tell you that story today. So welcome, Kath and Susan, to our set. We're happy to have you here. We wanted to have you here today because you were both so involved in the design of this quilt that we requested, and that's kind of rare for us these days. We don't really commission quilts or have them designed for specific purposes, but this was an exception to the rule. So let's start with, how did this quilt come about?
Initially, Bill Garner contacted Mary Leman.
Bill's our editor-in-chief, so.
Contacted Mary Leman Austin to see if she would be happy to design a quilt for us.
Now tell us who Mary is.
And Mary was a long time, most recently, a long time executive director of the magazine. Mm-hmm. She was, prior to that, she started as an art director and designer. She has a long history of designing quilts. Bonnie,
our founder, was able to find her in her home.
That's right.
Mary is one of Bonnie and George Leman's daughters, so she was automatically on staff, whether she wanted to be or not.
Exactly.
It sounds like.
We thought she would be a great person to design our anniversary quilt. She's a terrific designer, and she ended up being happy to do that. She wanted to design it, so that was the starting point.
And we just asked her to design a quilt, right? We didn't say it has to be a star quilt or it needs to be in these colors or anything like that.
No, it was specific to the anniversary, and I think we probably told her as well that it would likely be the cover quilt,
which implies a certain level of complexity and
exactly
skill involved.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so we asked her to do that, and then how long did it take her to turn around a design?
I think it might have been, 3 or 4 weeks before she submitted a few things. Initially, they were rough sketches, just a colored pencil sketch. They had blues and golds were, from the outset, some of the primary components of the design. And so she submitted that. She felt pretty good about it, and submitted that just for us to say, okay, should we go from here?
And that's what we did, right? There was not a lot of back and forth in the beginning.
Right.
It was great.
Yeah,
we love it.
I don't think we changed the design at all.
No. Okay.
It was, from there, it was a matter of going forward and picking fabrics and colors and size. This is a 20-inch block. That wasn't something Mary specified, but when Kath started drawing this, and you can see all the diamonds and the complexity in a block, so it wanted to be a pretty good size block, so it would be easily makeable with all the complexity that is involved in it. So,
but you had to decide that, and how did you determine the size of the block?
Well, initially we had done what we call some rough cuts. I sized the block up and did a paper printout of it. And then a rough cut, basically you're taking scraps of fabric and roughly cutting them and glue sticking them to that piece of paper so that you can start to get a sense of how a fabric is going to read, both the scale of the fabric, the design that's on the fabric. So we did a lot of that, and in fact, Susan and I invited Mary to come in after we had started that process so that she could be a part of that process too, to make sure it was reading the way that she wanted it to.
And also the scrappiness was an element we knew going in, right, that it was going to be a scrappy quilt. And that, I think, harkens back to what things were like when Bonnie was running the magazine as well as when Mary was running the magazine.
Right. We did that a lot. Mary is, I knew that, having worked with her for a long time, that she has that special affinity for scrap quilts. I mean, it's just how she thinks. So we didn't want to get away from that process.
So it takes a little more thought, but the results, well, the results speak for themselves, I think. So you rough cut the colors, and you kind of knew the direction you were going in. Did she have specific ideas about fabrics and color placement?
Well, there were these dark diamonds that run diagonally
ones
across,
that go this
and
way as well.
also in circles. She definitely wanted darks there so that it would carry that pattern. The yellow points, she definitely wanted something bright there to emphasize the star.
To be repeated.
And the rest was kind of working out a balance of contrast. You know, you had to have enough darks and lights and middles to make the pattern dance.
And she did bring in one fabric, though, that ended up making it a specific fabric that she wanted in the quilt.
She did. There's a sky dye there that has all these striations of pinks, and to her mind, it represented the sunset, Colorado sunsets. Originally, her thought was that it would go all the way around the quilt where those light yellow patches are.
Yes.
Well, we didn't have enough of that fabric to make that happen, especially since we had to be careful about where those striations and the stripes were going to, how they were going to go around the quilt.
Right.
So, so that was one element that had to be changed up. So Kath worked different iterations of putting color, you know, pinks in, yellows in, light blues in, whites in. And you'll see in the magazine article, we did show several of those iterations.
Right.
How we got to this final step.
So after you got the fabric, or the color placement decided, then it was a matter of finding fabric, which I know I was involved in because I have contact with the fabric companies, that point person. So we did order some fabric, and some came out of our sewing room.
Yes. When you're working with scraps that way, particularly for the initial design, we have maybe one piece of fabric that is this dark blue, and we really like the way that works. And ultimately, when you get much closer to finalizing your design and you're ready to find fabric, then the scary part happens because those things aren't available. And so we ran into a little bit of, ordering things, deciding something was perfect, ordering it, finding out it was no longer available.
Right.
So for many of the mediums and even some of the dark blues, for the medium level blues and the dark blues, we continue to work scrappy. So we were able to pull those things from stash fabric that we have in our office. And then we did have to make some adjustments in getting the darkest blues that were repeat. And we had to, since we moved the sky dye to the center, we had to find something that would fit well in this spot here and something that would read really well for these points. So those we ended up having to shop for.
Yes.
Susan and I took everything to the fabric shop, laid everything out. They were really kind to us and let us lay bolts and bolts of things out and make some decisions. And we kind of overbought because we wanted to run it by Mary ultimately. And she ended up picking the fabric for this and the fabric for this were ones that we were the least sure about buying. And they were like the exact right thing. So we kind of worked out things in a really good way.
Nice collaborative effort there. Well, I know that you put a lot of time and a lot of thought into the planning of it, and then we sent this out to be made by Peg Spradlin, who we work with quite frequently, and she does a fantastic job, no matter who she's working with.
Right.
And then, but you gave her sometimes we let her use her judgment, and this you gave her a more specific roadmap, right, for where the values were placed, and that was very specific.
I did. One reason that we chose Peg is that she has successfully done some other very scrappy quilts for us in the past. So we were pretty confident of her ability to kind of read our minds as far
Okay.
as placement. So I did give her pretty specific ranges of where the medium blues should go, and they would be made up of a particular bunch of swatches. So it's kind of a good thing because I was specific in that darks needed to go, across the body of the quilt, and of course this was going to be a very specific placement. This light blue is a very specific repeat placement, and marked it up in that way, but she had a lot of flexibility about which she actually chose and where she put them. And I think she did a wonderful job of reading our mind.
Yeah, impeccable.
Yeah, as Kat said, we had a lot of confidence that she would get it, and she did.
Definitely. Well, then the next component then to plan was the quilting.
Yes, and about 3/4 of the way into designing the quilt, Mary supplied us with this, what you see as the body of the quilt, meaning this inside, everything inside the gold border. She drew that part out, sketched it out, and I went ahead and drafted it again to see
On the computer.
On the computer. To the actual size, so that I could see. The main thing I was concerned about, and Mary was too, was whether or not we were adding enough lines at the size of this block that would kind of hold the quilting and look good as well. So we did a little bit of alteration and added a few more lines where things cross seams and made it a little bit tighter than her initial sketch, but it ended up working out really well. And then the main thing we were concerned about at that point was how to make the border be quilted so that it would actually hold the same, or what to do with it. And I didn't really want to do straight lines, and it seemed, even though this is a nice sort of florally pattern on the fabric on the border, that didn't seem quite to connect either, to do some kind of outlined quilting. So what I ended up doing was just reflecting this quilt pattern to the outside edges, and had to make some adjustments in the corners because of how that, it wouldn't be something that would actually reflect and fit the space. So I had to move a few lines and that kind of thing, but it ended up really working out well, and Mary was really pleased with it, and Peg did a wonderful job of doing that quilting, because this is all basically free motion. I mean, it's not programmed quilting in any way. So she did a really good job of doing that.
Did you send her printouts at scale?
I did send her one big printout of like a corner of it at scale, so she could see that. And of course, she had a small version of the whole thing as well.
And I just want to add, we also auditioned the thread color for the quilting.
That was a really key part of it.
It's a great thing to talk about.
There's a lot going on here, and we wanted to make sure the thread showed, and yet, really enhanced what was going on. So we did that by, laying out the scraps on some of the key pieces, and then just pulling thread over the top of that and seeing what gave us the best contrast, the best look, the best blend with the fabrics we had. And we think that gold, really did the trick.
It's beautiful. So did you audition variegated threads? What kind of colors did you pool and that you thought maybe not so much?
The gold, a couple golds, a light blue. Did we try a gray?
It seems like
I think we tried, like a medium gray, but I think once we put that gold down, it was the one.
Well, it really sparkles, and it lives up to its name, Bonnie's Rocky Mountain Star, as an homage to Bonnie's home state of, this clear blue skies and the bright sunshine that we get to enjoy 300 days a year, as we're always reminded. But it's a beautiful quilt. And as we said, the pattern is available in our August-September 2014 issue. If you want to take this on, it'll be a wonderful quilt. And thank you so much for being here today and telling the story behind this quilt.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you. Bye-bye. Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.